Of the last statement that you can't make everybody happy, I have a similar little conundrum. Last week, some people approached me before the share, and they said that the questions were too disruptive. Could I announce that be no questions till the end of the share? I made that announcement last week. Right after the share, a few people told me, we really missed the questions. Uh, so I'm not really sure what to do. One of the reasons why I teach adults is because I don't want to get involved in classroom management. When you have kids, you have to manage the classroom. But I see that classroom management becomes relevant even when you're with adults, So I'm not really sure what to do right now. Today, I think we'll keep last week's format of no questions. But in terms of, I don't know if you want to have a vote or you want to have a discussion or whatever. And I'll give it some thought as to try to create the balance, because I do understand the idea that people want to bring up questions, and that's actually a good thing. On the other hand, sometimes it may be a little disruptive. So, as always, the question is how do you balance those different things? So you give it some thought, I'll give it some thought, and maybe we will come to a consensus as to how to deal with it. Again, as I say, in terms of myself, I am not averse to questions, but once again, I want to accommodate what people want. Anyway, I want to start off a little bit. Yesterday was, of course, Yom Yerushalayim. I didn't get a chance to say anything about it because it was yesterday. I just want to say a short thought, and it actually ties into our class because it is from the Rambam. I want to share with you two observations that the Rambam makes in the Moreh Nevuchim about Yerushalayim. Very interesting interpretive observations. I'm sorry, pardon me.
Do you want to do this before?
Yeah, so first we have a dedication.
Can you see this?
Yeah, our shir today is dedicated anonymously for the Refuah Shalema of Oksana Bat Bluma and Evelina Bat Galina. That's it? Okay. Refuah Shalema B'toch Shar Chalei Yisrael.
And a reminder, if anybody is interested in sponsoring this year or any other shares, you can see me or get my information from Rita or in the Torah tidbits. That I'm leaving.
Thank you. The Rambam points out that although the first mention of Yerushalayim is after Avram's war with the four kings, and Melchizedek, the king of Shalem, which is actually Yerushalayim, Salem in English. Salem in America does not have such a good historical record, but nevertheless, Shalem is connected to the city of peace, brought Avraham Lechem and Yayin, and Melchizedek is actually Shem, the son of Noach. So it's actually Avram's great-grandfather. And Melchizedek was the title, the ancient title of the kings of Jerusalem, that even the Umot HaOlam recognized there was something holy and special about Shalem, and the king got the title righteous king, king of righteousness, Melchizedek. But the Rambam points out that later in the Torah, when the Torah talks about, particularly in the book of Devarim, when the Torah talks about bringing korbanos in the Beis HaMikdash, it always says, you shall bring your korbanos b'makom asher yivchar, in the place that God will choose. Doesn't say where that's going to be. And that's why the Beis HaMikdash is called Beit HaBechira, the house that was chosen by God. So it's almost as if the Torah was keeping the identity of Yerushalayim as the holy city secret, to be revealed. David HaMelech was told where the Beis HaMikdash was going to be built. The Rambam says, why does the Torah make it a secret? Yerushalayim was a known city. Shalem, whatever it was called, Shalem, Yerushalayim. So the Rambam says the following. He says two things. If the Umot HaOlam would have known that Yerushalayim was the holy designated city of God, they would have fought ferociously, much more so than they did, and that would have made the conquest of Yerushalayim much, much more difficult. And then the Rambam goes further. We know that Yerushalayim straddles the Shvatim of Yehuda and Binyamin. We know this, that part of, even the Beis HaMikdash itself is divided. Part of the Makom HaMikdash is Bechelko Shel Yehuda. Part of it is Bechelko Shel Binyamin. Granted, all of the tribes, it's like the District of Columbia, Lahavdil, which is kind of it is national property, but it is physically situated within the tribal boundaries of Yehuda and Binyamin. So says the Rambam, had the tribes been aware of where the holy city would be situated, they would not have agreed to the Chalukat Haaretz. Therefore, the Rambam says it was important to keep the identity of the holy city secret until after the conquest and even after the tribal division of the land. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu always refers to Yerushalayim as Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that God will choose. My question on the Rambam is simply this. Given the fact that we see already from the time of Shem ben Noach that there was something special about the city, that it was called Shalem, the city of peace, or the city of harmony, the city of completion, and the kings were given the very honorific title of Malki Tzedek, king of righteousness. So the Rambam's implication that Hashem wanted to keep this totally unknown so nobody would recognize that this had a special spiritual significance seems to be contradicted by the Malki Tzedek story itself. And after all, it was the site, the Har HaBayit was the site of Akedat Yitzchak. Are we to assume that the Jewish people simply didn't have a tradition that was the place? It was like a totally unknown thing till Hashem revealed it to David HaMelech. By the way, a little aside on this, the Rambam does not say this, but it's based on a medrash. How do we get Yerushalayim from Shalem? Right? The original name of the city is Shalem, Salem. So the Medrash explains very interestingly that Yerushalayim is like Minneapolis, St. Paul, Lahavdil. It's twin cities. The original city was Shalem. But Avram Avinu, when he was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak on Har HaMoriah, Avram Avinu called the place Hashem Yireh. God will see, meaning God will look down and see what was done here today, and that shall be an eternal merit for OUisrael. So as a result, the city was Shalem, the Har HaBayit was called Yireh. Therefore, Yerushalayim is Yireh Shalem. So how do you get Yeru? So again, the Meforshim say that the Aleph and the Hey in Yireh just gets combined into a Vav, because the gematria of Aleph and Hey is Vav. So when they joined the two cities, they contracted it into Yeru. Now, we're still not 100% there, because that would give you Yerushalem, just like the English, Jerusalem. Right? So where do you get the extra yud, yim? Right? Where do you get the second yud? Now, the truth of the matter is, in most of Tanakh, not in the Torah, because the Torah doesn't mention Yerushalayim, but in the Nevi'im and Kesuvim, when Yerushalayim is spelled out, it typically does not have the second yud. We pronounce it. The Kri is Yerushalayim, but it actually does not have the yud. It's Yerushalem in terms of the consonants in the word. But here too, the Meforshim say very beautifully that just like Raglayim, Yadayim, Oznayim, Einayim means two, or a plural, Yerushalayim means two Yerushalems. And it's not East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, because that's one city, but it's the heavenly Yerushalayim Shalmala, Yerushalayim Shalmata, and our job in life is to create an alignment between the heavenly Yerushalayim and the earthly Yerushalayim, to have them in alignment, Zeh L'umat Zeh. And when they are in alignment through our mitzvot, our Torah, our Avat Yisrael, all of the good things, our tzedakah, our chesed, our achdos, they become in alignment. That's when there's geula. When they're not in alignment, we remain in Golos, we remain in Churban. And that's how you get from Shalem to Yerushalayim. It's Yireh Shalem. The Aleph and the Hey get combined into a Vav. And the double Yud, the extra Yud, is Yerushalayim Shalmala, Yerushalayim Shalmata. Okay. But be it as it may, that's not from the Rambam. The first Torah that the Rambam says is why the identity of the holy city was kept obscure in the phrase Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. But then he makes a second point, which can have some very interesting political implications even today. The Rambam points out that Eretz Yisrael was largely acquired by military conquest, right? The book of Yoshua discusses wars, and Yoshua didn't finish the job. Many wars continued during the Judges period, and even in David HaMelech's time, there were wars. So Eretz Yisrael, including the city of Jerusalem, was acquired by milchama. And yet the Har HaBayit itself was not acquired by milchama. It was acquired by negotiated purchase. There was a man, we're given his name, Aravna HaYevusi, Aravna the Jebusite. He was a Canaanite. Yevusi is one of the 7 nations of Canaan. And he happened to own the Har HaBayit, Har Moriah, and he used it as a threshing floor. It was an area that he would thresh grain. And David HaMelech was instructed by God after a plague to purchase the Temple Mount from Aravna HaYevusi. And David HaMelech collected money from every tribe. That's why I mentioned that although the Har HaBayit and Yerushalayim is situated physically between Yehuda and Binyamin, but in fact it is national property. It was purchased from every tribe. So the Rambam says, if all of Eretz Yisrael was conquered by military conquest, why was it necessary for the Temple Mount to be purchased? And the Rambam says a fascinating thing. He says, we know that David HaMelech himself wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told David HaMelech, you are not allowed to build the Beis HaMikdash, because the Beis HaMikdash is a place of shalom, a place of peace. And you are a man of war. You're a man of bloodshed. Even though all of David's wars were Muhamot Hashem, they were not bloodthirsty violence. These were divine commandments. David HaMelech did nothing wrong. David HaMelech did everything right in all of those wars. Nonetheless, the Beit HaMikdash must be connected to shalom. It cannot be a product of milchama and ketata. Therefore, although David HaMelech bought the Temple Mount, he bought it, and although David HaMelech assembled all the raw materials for the Beis HaMikdash, the actual building of the Beis HaMikdash could only be undertaken during the reign of Shlomo HaMelech, who already was a man of peace. So the Rambam says the following point, interesting point. The same way that David HaMelech could not build the Beis HaMikdash because he was an Ish Damim, a man of blood, the Temple Mount itself cannot be acquired by military conquest. Because it must be acquired in a peaceful, consensual, cooperative way. It's just an extension, the Rambam says, of the fact that David HaMelech couldn't build the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the implications, again, I don't want to fully get into all of this. Obviously, we regained the Har HaBayit through Milchama, right? This was the great miracle, or one of the many miracles, but many say the greatest of the 6-day war. Nevertheless, when people talk about sometimes, why don't we build the Beis HaMikdash now? So without getting into all of the implications, part of it is that we really can't build a Beis HaMikdash till the world reaches a state where it recognizes that this is a holy place of the God of Israel. And that could be why the Rambam writes, halachically, in Hilchos Malachim, that the Beis HaMikdash must wait until the coming of Mashiach. And part of that might be because part of the messianic vision, as you see in the prophet Yeshayahu, is that the whole world will come to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there will no longer be war, and there will no longer be hatred. And only then are we ready to build a Beis HaMikdash. You don't build a Beis HaMikdash in a state of war, a state of violence, and the like. So yes, we conquered what we needed to conquer, but we're not yet ready to build a Beis HaMikdash because the world itself has not reached that stage. Remember that the Beis HaMikdash is designed to be a house of tefillah for the entire world. This goes all the way back to Shlomo HaMelech's dedication of the first Beis HaMikdash. In the book of Malachim, a very long dedication in which he prayed to God that may every person in the world, even if they're not Mibnei Brit, they're not of the covenant of Abraham, may they turn their hearts towards this place to pray to you for whatever it is that they need. And Yeshayahu, of course, has the very famous pasuk in the name of Hashem, Ki beisi beis tefillah yikarei l'chol ha'amim, that my house will be a house of prayer for all of the nations of the world. But essentially, the Rambam is arguing that until we get to that point, we're not yet ready for the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not just the Jewish people need to be transformed. In a sense, the world itself needs to be elevated and transformed, and that's why everything connected to the Mikdash must be connected to Shalom and the like. So again, we do have the Harabayas. Everyone, the older people at least remember the announcement of Matagor, Harabayas Biyadenu. Very, very exciting. And someone was just telling me that they remember that first Shavuos, just a few weeks. Not a few weeks, just around a week after, Chavches, and then Shavuos is Vav Sivan. The first time that people went to the Kotel Maravi for at least 19 years, and the excitement was so palpable, an amazing level of excitement. And now, Baruch Hashem, going to the Kotel, maybe it's not routine, I hope it's not routine, but it's a relatively common type of thing. Certainly one does not have the same feelings that one might have had in 1967 going for the first time. But it reminds me of a famous Hasidic vort in L'David Hashem Ori. That's the Mizmor that we say from Elul till the end of Sukkot. So the famous pasuk says, that David HaMelech says, Achas sha'alti mi'es Hashem osa avakesh. There is one thing I ask of God. Shifti bebeis Hashem kol yimei chayai. I want to dwell in the house of Hashem all the days of my life. Lachzos b'noam Hashem, to see the pleasantness or the sweetness of Hashem. Like Naomi, sweetness. Ulevaker beheichalo, and to visit his sanctuary. So the Hasidic vort is, well, wait a second here. Does he want to be a permanent citizen or a visitor? He says, I want to dwell in the house of God all the days of my life. And then he adds, Ulavakir, I want to pay a visit. Well, which is it? You want to be a visitor, or you want to be in the house of Hashem all the days of their life? So the Hasidic thought is, they give a mashal of a boy that puts on tefillin for the first time after his bar mitzvah. And a kid looks forward to putting on tefillin. That's kind of, he's with the big boys now. Maybe from the time he's 11, he's dreaming of tefillin. And when he starts putting on his tefillin, and initially, of course, the straps collapse on themselves. I don't know, that seems to be an occupational hazard of when you begin to put on tefillin. But it's so exciting, it's so geschmack, it's so wonderful, so much enthusiasm. But then the days become weeks, and the weeks become months, and the months become years, and the years become decades. And B'ezras Hashem, one should continue to put on tefillin, ad mea v'yesrim shana, but it certainly does not have the same excitement as the first time. So David HaMelech prays, I want to be in the house of Hashem all the time, but I want it to have the same excitement as my first time visit. I want to be a first time visitor in all of the avodah that I do. Eretz Yisrael B'chlal is that way. I remember the very first time I came to Eretz Yisrael as a tourist, 1979. I had finished law school, and my parents, Aleim Shalom, who did not really have money for it, they gave me a trip to Eretz Yisrael, and I remember how exciting everything was. Even missing the buses was great. And in those days, 79, pre-Intifada, things were relatively peaceful. The Yom Kippur War had already subsided, and we used to go on Arab buses. Maybe some of you might remember that. There was kind of a little bit of a chavaya. They had goats and chickens on the buses. It was kind of fun going on the Arab buses. And Getting lost was great. Everything was so wonderful. After a while, you get habituated. You also get older. That has something to do with it. And not so much fun to walk around in the sun and whatever it would be. Uh, but what happens is that the enthusiasm sometimes wears off. But we have to be makir always that Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest person who ever lived, the greatest Navi, did not have the zechus to come to Eretz Yisrael, even though he yearned and even though he begged Hashem for a chance. And we have the zechus to be in Eretz Yisrael, to be in Yerushalayim. We don't have a mikdash yet, but at least we're in proximity to the makom of the mikdash. And we just take it for granted. It reminds me a little bit. There was a famous, in the 19th century, there was actually a very well-known German Rav, and one of Mayor Lehman, Marcus Lehman, who taught assimilated youth through historical novels. He wrote different types of novels, which were based on midrashim and based on, right? So actually it was a very effective outreach tool to bring people. So one of his novels is about Rabbi Akiva. So there's a scene in the novel there. It mentions Rabbi Akiva's wife, who was single at the time. She was a young girl, Rachel, and she was with her friends, and they were thinking about how to spend the afternoon. So Rachel suggested, again, this is kind of fiction, but it's a reconstruction. Why don't we go to the Beis Hamikdash and watch the korbanos? So her girlfriend said, they always do the same thing every day there. So let's go shopping instead. So, again, I don't know if such a conversation ever took place, but it just shows you that you could, look at you could just not be excited about no matter what it is. You get habituated, and it doesn't make the same rashim. And this is what David HaMelech is praying. I want to be here always, but I want to feel like it's my first time visitor. So that's a very, very important yesod to keep in mind. Okay, so that's my little talk on Yom Yerushalayim. Now I want to I'm not sure, maybe we'll even finish up Igeret Hashmat today. The basic point, when all of the dust settles, the Rambam now has to deal with the final question that took him quite a while to reach, right? We went through the laws of martyrdom. And one of the things that you do have to give your life for is avodah zarah, right? We talked about that. So the question finally becomes, do we have to give up our life before we profess belief in Islam or not? So here, the Rambam makes the point, you don't have to give up your life. And therefore, if you didn't give up your life, you committed no sin. You are permitted to say, I believe in Islam and Muhammad is God's prophet, and you do not have to give up your life. Now, why is that so? Because the Rambam just said, for avodah zarah, you have to give up your life. Now, I've said already a few times, but just to remind you, the one thing that we might have said if we were asked the question is specifically not the way the Rambam goes. One might have addressed the question by saying, well, yeah, you have to give up your life before you profess idolatry, but Islam is a monotheistic religion. Islam does not worship images or idols. It does not impart physicality to the divinity, and it does not believe in a Trinitarian concept. Remember, there are two reasons why the Rambam says Christianity, which basically was Catholicism, this is pre-Reformation, there are two reasons that make Christianity an idolatrous belief, according to the Rambam. One is the duality or the multiplicity based on the Trinity, more than one God. The other is the physicality, the notion that God had a physical form. Those are the two reasons why, according to the Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam was cholek. Rabbeinu Tam actually said it was not idolatry, but according to the Rambam, it was idolatry for those two reasons. Now, based on that argument, Islam is not idolatry because neither of those reasons apply. The idea of God is a monotheistic entity with no multiplicity. And number two, it is totally spiritual. There is no physicality. There's no corporality of the divine. In fact, Islam still is very, very strict on even paintings and making images of anything. Actually, stricter than Jewish halacha is on this. So, what's interesting is it's interesting to ponder what you might call the road not taken. In other words, in spite of the fact that the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah asserts as a general proposition that Islam is monotheistic and it is not idolatrous, that is not the route that he chose in Igeret Hashmad to justify those affirmations. In other words, he could have said that, right? That would have worked too. And yet I need to emphasize, and again, this is not the first time I'm saying this, that the Rambam specifically does not predicate his heter on that. And instead, I'll try to address later why he didn't do that, but he does not do that. Instead, he offers two other rationales why a Jew is permitted to make those affirmations and does not have to give up his life. Rationale, and both of these rationales are very problematical. Rationale number one is a profession of belief is not the same as an action. I must give up my life before I worship Avodah Zarah. Now, worship could mean pray to an idol. It could mean sacrifice to an idol. It could even mean declaring to the idol, you are my God. Those are acts. Even speech can be an act of Avodah Zarah. But if all I say is to somebody, I believe this, but I don't act upon it, the Rambam makes actually a fairly startling assertion that a profession of belief is not the same as an idolatrous action. So, for example, according to the Rambam, if a person, let's say the Nazis are looking for somebody, for a Jew, and you say, can I say, I am a Christian. I am a believer in Jesus. According to the Rambam, you can do that. Meaning, you'd have to give up your life before you enter a church and take Mass, because that's an act of worship. But if you simply say what you are, or what you want to profess to be, the Rambam's chiddush is a profession of faith is not in itself an act of idolatrous worship. Now, I want to point out, this is one of the places where Rabbi Dr. Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, I've mentioned him a number of times, he's wrote extensively. He's wrote on many, many things. Actually, his stuff is amazing. I actually just love reading it. But one of the things he wrote a few articles on is he wrote on this Maimer Kiddush Hashem or Igeres Hashmad, and he claims that it is a non-halachic work, and a lot of what the Rambam is doing is to simply allow a beleaguered community to feel good about itself in order not to be demoralized. And he makes the point that this statement of the Rambam, that profession of faith is not the same as idolatrous action, is, number one, he feels the Rambam himself didn't agree to it. And let me just point out that obviously it is obvious that the Balei Atosos during the Crusades in France and Germany did not believe in it as well, because they routinely ruled that a person must give up his life before he declares that he's a Christian. So when the Rambam makes this point, we're not saying it halacha l'maisa, so to speak, but this is the Rambam's first nekudah, big chiddush, profession of faith is not idolatrous action. That's reason number one. And then he gives reason number 2, which is equally fascinating. Reason number 2 is they know you don't really mean it, meaning the guys that are going around and they put a knife to your throat and they say these words or we'll kill you, and you say these words and then they send you home, they know it's not sincere. So the idea is, the Rambam says, even avodah zarah, if the oppressor knows that you don't really believe in what you're doing and you're only doing it not to get killed, that's not called avodah zarah, because by definition, there is no belief behind the action. Now, this thought, yeah, well, that's right. This thought is very problematical, because here's the thing. If you're going to tell me, I mean, you go in circles. If you're going to tell me, if the oppressor knows I don't mean it and I'm only doing it not to get killed, that's not avodah zarah for which I have to give my life, then why would I ever have to give my life for avodah zarah? Meaning, somebody goes over to me and says, bow down to this idol or I'll kill you. He knows I'm only doing it because I don't want to get killed. So why do I have to get killed? In other words, the whole halacha that I must give up my life before I worship an idol doesn't make sense if you're going to tell me, if they know I'm only doing it to save my life, it's not idolatry in the first place. And you know, the example of Chana and the 7 sons would be an example of that as well. So again, Dr. Soloveitchik uses this as kind of evidence that the Rambam didn't really believe this either. But again, he's trying to give comfort to a community that failed in some degree. But these are the 2 surprising rationales that the Rambam does offer. And the surprising rationale that the Rambam does not offer is that Islam is not avodah zarah, which means the Rambam's 2 rationales apply equally to Christianity, as opposed to anything unique about Islam. And again, as I say, obviously, the experience of the Ashkenazic communities during the Crusades was absolutely not in accordance with the Rambam's opinion, and that is why Jewish communities were wiped out during the Crusades, because of their refusal to accept Christianity. Now, the issue of the Holocaust, though, is still a little different, and this is pretty subtle. The issue is, could a Jew save his life by saying he's a Christian, or by getting documents that say he's a Christian? Now, according to the Rambam, the answer is for sure yes. That's without a machlokas. But I want to point out that many poskim say, even according to Tosfos, it would be permitted for the following reason. Tosfos says, it is forbidden for a Jew who is known to be Jewish to say, I repudiate my Judaism by being a Christian, because that's a renunciation. But that's not what went on in Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, it wouldn't help you to say, I'm a Jew that converted to a Christian. They would kill you anyway. So what you were doing is, you were not renouncing your Judaism. You were engaged in an impersonation of being somebody else. So that's a subtle distinction. There is a distinction between identifying myself as a Jew who is repudiating Judaism and embracing Christianity, versus passing myself off as somebody who was not Jewish to begin with. So many say that, even like Tosfos that says a Jew must give up his life before he says, I embrace Christianity, many would say impersonation would still be permitted. And indeed, it was common. There were even very great rabbis who were smuggled out of Europe with either papers that they were Christian, or even they were dressed as a priest or whatever it is, and they got smuggled out. So this is a subtle distinction between what you might call repudiation versus impersonation. impersonation is a different thing. But like the Rambam, there's no question whatsoever. Like the Rambam, even if they know I'm Jewish, I could say I believe in Christianity because the Rambam has a chiddush. Profession of faith is not an act of avodah zarah. A question? Yeah.
This ties in also to the second rationale you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's not just a question of whether the oppressor knows that you're not really me, but it's that others around him. The Gemara talks about the fact that if you do an act of avodah zarah, others around you will see that and will then think you are doing avodah zarah. In the case of where an oppressor is just putting a knife to your throat, he doesn't know, but there are 10 people over there.
Well, yeah, but don't you have the kind of the same problem? Because if everybody sees the guy holding a knife to my throat, then l'chara they're also going to know that I'm only doing it out of fear for my life. Now, I do want to point out that the Rambam then has a backup rationale.
Correct.
Yeah.
That rationale, I think, is one
Yeah.
that because the whole issue of whether you can be over on a loud jingle mice, whether or not there's no mice, but Amira,
Yeah.
the issue that at time is that Amira is a mice. Speaking is a hot, make a negger, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Say that in that case, the second rationale.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where others are seeing you doing it.
Yeah.
That has a more profound effect on others other than the oppressor.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And again, as I say, I hate to say it, it's not for me to say that the Rambam is giving halachic conclusions that he himself knows are wrong, but this is Dr. Soloveitchik's rationale. Yeah, and I have to say that, there is a lot of logic in his position because the Rambam then has another thing that's important. And you see, it's like they say, the person who is up for a murder charge has two defenses. One is, I have an alibi that I wasn't there. And the other is, I killed him in self-defense. So the Rambam kind of does it this way. He says, number one, they didn't have to give up their lives for these two reasons. But number two, even if they should have given up their lives, they're still Jews in good standing after the fact. Remember, that was the point the Rambam made? That even if you worshipped avodah zarah, you're still a good Jew. And the truth of the matter is, I think the Rambam's main argument is that, because remember what he was fighting against. He was fighting against the contention of this rabbi that says, once you have professed another faith, you are not Jewish, your mitzvot are worthless, God does not want you to do anything, your davening is rejected, your Shabbos is worthless, and the like. That, remember, the Rambam has said he had to fight. So, as a result, he made that point that even if we say they should have given up their lives, they are still Jews in good standing after the fact. That, indeed, is both the halacha, and I think that in the Rambam's heart of hearts, although it's very dangerous for me to talk in those terms, that was the ultimate rationale that the Rambam was going with, but he wanted to offer them some comfort that, maybe you didn't even have to give your life. Now, and you see that the Rambam is equivocating here, because the Rambam says, of course, if you're willing to give your life up for this, that is a great Kiddush Hashem. Now, wait a second here. Remember in the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam totally rejected the notion of voluntary martyrdom. In other words, you either have to give up your life, or you're not allowed to give up your life. All of a sudden, the Rambam brings in this idea, if you were willing to give up your life, that's a pretty good thing. What's going on here? So the Rambam is kind of hinting, yeah, you really should have given up your life. I'm not going to say you have to, but you should have. But okay, you're still a Jew in good standing. Because you see, because if the Rambam honestly held that there was no duty to give up your life, he wouldn't have said you're allowed to give up your life, because the Rambam's overall thesis is there's no such thing as voluntary martyrdom. So this is very, very fascinating because you see that the Rambam is equivocating. Now, again, the one point he's not equivocating on is that they remain Jewish and whatever mitzvot they do are valuable. That is the firm conclusion that is uncontested. But in terms of the should you have given up your life, you see the Rambam is kind of fudging this and is equivocating on it. He doesn't want to say they had to give up their lives, but he's saying, but you could have done so, and it's Kiddush Hashem, etc. Now, the final point the Rambam makes is also very interesting. He says, do whatever mitzvahs you can do, for sure. Every mitzvah you do is good, is wonderful. One should never have the attitude that because I can't keep everything, I shouldn't keep anything. Very important. But the Rambam says you have a religious duty to get out of there, to move, to relocate, to go to a place where you can keep the Torah without fear. And even if this means you will be poverty-stricken, and even if it means if you will have to give up all of your possessions and all of your property, being able to serve God is worth more than any of your money. Move, leave. And then the Rambam says, anybody who stays because they don't want to give up their nechasim, they may become actually a mazid almost in terms of their complicity in whatever averos they wind up doing. Now we know autobiographically, this was the Rambam's own experience, right? The Rambam did indeed, with his family, move to different places within the Islamic world in order to escape persecution. This is actually his advice for everybody. So you see what's going on here. He's trying to do a lot of things. He's trying to comfort the people that are stuck there. He's trying to give them chizuk. He's trying to encourage them to do whatever mitzvos they can. But he's also intimating it would have been better if you would have given your life. And he's telling them, get out of there. So he's trying to do two things at once. He's telling them, get out. But he's also saying, but if you're not able to get out, or you feel you can't get out, nevertheless, you're still a Jew in God's eyes, and your mitzvahs count. So it actually is a very masterful work, which is trying to accomplish a number of objectives. And again, Dr. Soloveitchik says that absolute halachic accuracy was not necessarily the Rambam's first objective here, because he's trying to rebuild a devastated community that has been demoralized by the message that they've gotten, and he needs to build them up. And this might even be an example of what Chazal described using the pasuk in Tehillim, Eit lasot lashem eferet torasecha. Sometimes to stand up for God, you might have to temporarily deviate a little bit from the halacha in order to give people encouragement and chizuk. And by and large, the letter did accomplish this objective. The communities were built up. They did become Torah observant. Some of them did profess this belief, but then they were left alone. The Rambam made the point that, you said your 5-second thing, and then they let you go home and keep Shabbos and keep kosher and keep tefillin. So in a sense, the letter was successful, although it's straddling some inconsistent ideas. Yeah?
Did anyone use these arguments in Spain?
In the
time of the explosion?
Yes, obviously. That's much later. That's in the 15th century. They were used in Spain, and that would justify the Marranos, as they were called. Although now they're called conversos or anusim. I understand Marranos means pig, I think, so they actually don't like that term. But yes, in fact, keep in mind that the response of Jews in the Spanish countries, which was confronted with Christianity, was different than the response in France and Germany. France and Germany, martyrdom was the norm. In Islamic countries, and even in Christian Spain, later, there you had much more affirming, external affirming, and that was largely based on the precedent of Mamar Kiddush Hashem, Igeret Tashman. Okay, we'll stop here. So I think, Baruch Hashem, we've actually finished our coverage of this letter. Our next letter will be a letter that the Rambam wrote a few years later, again, dealing with Islamic persecutions, but from a different direction, the problem of the false Mashiach, interestingly enough, not Shabtai Tzvi, but somebody much earlier, and this is called Igeret Teiman, where the Rambam discusses how do you know if somebody is a true Mashiach or a false Mashiach. So this is Igeret Teiman, which also has another name, Mamar Petach Tikva, the opening of hope. Okay, have a wonderful, wonderful Yom Tov. May all of us be zocheh to be makabel the Torah ki ish echad uvalev echad.